computer engineer who is now a paralegal. Over a 40-year career, she worked in hardware development, welfare applications, software applications, network management, and network security. As a paralegal, she's worked in complex litigation translating between technical experts, lawyers, and clients. She has been a Manzano del Sol resident since 2012. And she was a member of the board before that, the advisory board. So she's going to give us a history of Manzano del Sol right now, and I know you're going to enjoy it. We greet that. Now, today I'm going to be talking about how Manzano del Sol started. But really, I'm talking about my part in starting Manzano del Sol. These are a lot of my memories. And I'm going to be talking about 5 different things. First of all, how did it start and how did I get into this? I was in my 20s. And then how did the process go of raising seed money, hiring a consultant, hiring architects, engineers, contractors to give us quotes, and getting started on doing this. Then we did the developing of the plans. We started working with the city, we started working with laws, regulations, and then we looked at getting financing. It turned out we were building a 202 low-income housing project, and the government did not fund that program, so we had to find financing on our own. And then finally, what did I do after the building was built and I was the assistant administrator here for a time? Okay, first of all, how did I get started? Well, my husband was on the board of Christian education at First Congregational Church. And I had little children, and I had to wait for him because we only had one car. And I put my kids in the kids' playroom, which is a playroom for little kids, and I sat across the hall in the library. Well, it turned out they were having a meeting in the library, which was, let's do something as a church for the problems of the elderly. Well, what can we do? Maybe taking meals to rent to old people, maybe having some kind of outreach. And then one lady said, I have a piece of land that I will donate my own part of the land to do something like build a retirement home or rooms for the elderly. So they said, oh, that sounds very interesting. And somebody said, there's a person who does consulting for the United Church of Christ named Everett Luther. He lives in Phoenix. And they said, this sounds interesting. Meeting over. Next time, my husband had a meeting of the Board of Christian Education. I went and sat in the library, and they were doing the same thing. What are we going to do? Maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that. And I stood up and said, what we need to do is form a committee, elect somebody in charge. How many of you will donate $50 to bring Ed Luther here to explain to us how we would build a retirement home? And people said, well, I'll give money. We raised enough money right there. And I went and bought Ed Luther a ticket. We flew to Albuquerque. I ended up being the chairman of the committee. And we started working on this. And the thing that I felt from the very beginning, which I got from Everett Luther, was there are 2 ways you can set up housing for the elderly. One is, we are going to take care of you. We are going to nurse you, protect you, guide you. And then there's the other side, which is, we are going to be your loyal staff, your butler, your cook. We are here to make your life here as independent as you want. We are here to do your bidding. This is your home, and this is where you make a lot of the choices that affect us. Okay, this happened during the spring of 1976. And the 3 churches that were involved in this was First Congregational Church, where the minister was Francis Rapp. The second was Church of the Good Shepherd. And Shirley Coppage here is one of the members of the Church of the Good Shepherd. And was his name Rick Torn? Who was the minister? Jim Torn. I was racking my brain. What was that guy's name? And then there was Church of St. Paul's United Church, where the minister was Nelson Reese Murphy. And those were the three churches that got together and did this project. Most of the people were from First Congregational Church, and that's where we we met. Now, when we had Ed Luther come here, he said, this is a pretty simple process. The government has this 202 project for housing for the elderly. First of all, you're going to need some seed money. And the way you get the seed money is you get a bunch of guarantors. They go down and sign a promissory note at the bank for $2,500. You get about 36 guarantors. You're going to have somewhere around $100,000 that you can spend hiring architects and doing what you need to do to get this going. So we started out by raising the money for the guarantors, getting the guarantors to go down and pledge this money. And at that time, it was Albuquerque National Bank, and one of the church members was a vice president there, so he talked them into letting us do this. Then we had hired an architectural firm. Now, we went to these meetings to meet with architects, and we had an idea of what we wanted. And one meeting was with an architect whose name I will not give you. As we're sitting there, I happened to be sitting at the end of the table. There were two people from Care Associates, our corporation, and then there was the architect. I would ask a question and he'd answer it to the men. The men would ask a question, he'd answer it to them. And I said, I'm not going to work with this guy. We cannot have this guy as our architect. So we ended up getting a combination of Cabot Dysart, who had been an architect and engineer down in Roswell, but had retired to Corrales, and Hildreth Barker and Andrew Boll from an architectural firm, Barker and Boll, here in town. And they had already built some low-income housing, and they knew a lot of the regulations. So we went with them. Now, our initial plan was to build a one-bedroom that we estimated would cost about $300 a month in rent and would require a $1,000 move-in fee. A two-bedroom was going to be $350, and it would need $1,500. And then there would be a two-bedroom, two-bath, which would be $400. And you would need to pay $2,000 to move in. Now, why did we have this entry fee? The reason we had that, as Everett Luther explained to us, is when the building opens, you have to have the staff. You have cooks, you have janitors, you have administrators, and you have no residents and no rent. So the first thing you have to do is get some money up front to pay for these people. We were really rushing to move people in, and we were getting as many as 8 people a day moving in, and that's a real rush with only 2 elevators, and sure enough, one of the elevators stopped working partway through the moving. So the way it went was in 1977, we started getting our financing. In 79, we had the working drawings, and were ready to start building. We were planning to have the construction done by the end of 78. It didn't turn out that way. Now, we also had a lot of people in the community. Pat Kaler, who was a newspaper writer, he was a member of the church. He wrote articles about us every few months. Then Bill Atkinson, who was an attorney, did all of our legal work. We had to file for an 802.3 nonprofit corporation. And we started doing it, and we got it wrong, and I called up the guy at IRS and said, I'm this church lady, and I'm trying to do this. And he said, let me tell you what to do. And we went through the provisions one by one. He told me how to fill it out. We sent it in. Poof, it was done. Now, after a while, our estimate went from about $4,500 to about $6,000. and the rents went up commensurately. Now, while we were working on the plans, there were lots of decisions. And some of them I was responsible for. Now, I'll tell you what I'm responsible for. One of them is there's an outlet in the bathroom. If you remember, back in the 70s, there would be an outlet in the light fixture. And they said an outlet is going to cost $110 per apartment. That's a lot of money added to the bottom line. And I said, people are starting to use hair dryers. And so finally, I got my way and we had an outlet. The second thing was they were trying to put in an elevator, and they were deciding between an electric elevator and a hydraulic elevator. And they said, when it's over 4 stories, you have to use an electric elevator. And I said, why is that? I know there's a building, an apartment building on Montgomery, where they have a hydraulic elevator and it's 7 stories high. And he said, well, a hydraulic elevator is very slow. I said, this is a home for old people. They can have a slow elevator. So we have a hydraulic elevator. And in fact, the guy from the builder said, well, we were going to have to put a speed governor on the elevator anyway, because we didn't want the elevator to take off. Now, the person who donated the land was named Catherine Higgins. Now, she had a husband who had since passed away, and his brother, and they bought a piece of land, and they each owned half of it. And so Catherine inherited half this property. This is the piece of property. And I remember the brother's name is Fred. When I looked in the album, it said his name was Dan, and I don't think that's right. I think it was Fred. Fred wanted to sell the property, but he couldn't sell it unless Catherine agreed. And so we said, Fred, we'll give you $200,000 if you will sign a form that says we can purchase, we have the right of purchase for this. And he said, well, how long is this going to take? And I said, just 1.5 years. And he said, okay, because he had a girlfriend and he wanted to go on a cruise with the girlfriend. Now, it took longer than 1.5 years, and by the time Fred actually got his money, he was no longer with his girlfriend, and he was no longer in a condition to go on that world cruise. That was kind of sad. Okay, then the next part we had was setting up the nursing home. Now, originally we figured we would have 20 beds, then it got to be more, it got to be 100, I think, and I think at the end it was pretty much around 120. The other thing you'll notice is that these buildings do not have that many rooms or apartments. Over the years, the rooms and apartments have been converted to offices. And Ed Luther explained it to us. He said, when you move in, you're going to need every dollar you can get. But as time goes by, you're going to have more money, you're going to want to offer more services, and those people are going to need offices. And the spaces were so much smaller. When we first started, the front desk was maybe 6 or 7 feet deep. And then the administrator's office was in that back half of that room. It was such a tiny office for the administrator. The next thing that we did was we went around and looked at other facilities. And for 3 years, my family was treated, not only to me flying off to Phoenix, but every time we went anywhere, I wanted to go see the nursing homes, ask them what was good, what was bad, how it was set up. And one lady said, make sure you make it a beautiful beauty parlor. She said, I went and saw another place where they had like wicker, not wicker, but cross-leaved white with pink flowers, pink wall, pink chairs, and it was really cute. Now this is 1976 style, and that was it for beauty shops. We also looked at how dining rooms were set up. And some places had service that they brought it to your table. And we decided that we liked going through the line and being able to look at the food that you were going to get. We had 2 entrees, 2 vegetables, 2 starches, and as you went through, you could say more or less. Of course, there was also a salad bar that was pre-COVID. We had, what was the other thing I was thinking of? Oh, we wanted the residents to be in control of as much as possible in the building. And Ed Luther said, don't furnish the lounges in the hall. Let the residents furnish them. They're all moving from bigger houses to here. There's going to be a ton of furniture that's available. And that's what happened. All the lounges were furnished with furniture that came from residents who were moving in. And in the first year or so, they were beautiful. The next thing is the room that's now the library was not a library. It had a grand piano. And at night, people would go down to that room, visit, they'd bring in some tea and some little drinks, and somebody would play the piano, people would sing or visit, and it was very nice, very different. Also, we did not have this room. This is a later addition. The chapel was at the end, down where the cabinets are. There was a raised area, and that was where speakers spoke. That's where the Sunday services were. And the dining room was a little smaller. Also, there was, besides the beauty shop, there was a men's club. Men were the only people allowed in the men's club. It was quite different. Now, once we got this all planned out and we got the drawings done, we realized we were not going to be able to get financing. I spent about 6 months trying various schemes to get financing. And one place I went to was a real estate developer. And I had this scheme of him owning the property and leasing it to a tax-free entity, and he could take money off that. And at one point he said, just a minute, young lady, you need to take you and your baby home and let people who really know what they're doing handle this problem. The other thing that happened at that time was the board, some people on the board said, we are now getting to a point where we really need some expertise in getting this done. And so they decided to unelect me and elect another board member to be the chairman of the board. And somebody, and I wish I could remember who, got up and said, I'm down here at this church all the time. Nobody has the drive, the perseverance, the diligence to do this besides Patricia Hill. And if you get somebody else in here who doesn't know the history, doesn't know what's going on, you are going to wreck this project. And I said, well, that's very nice. And so I stayed on as chairman. Okay, once we got the funding, then we did the bidding. And KL House won the construction bid, which was kind of sad because Bradbury and Stam had spent 3 years meeting with us every week to help us get estimates, help us do all of this stuff. Beth Stam, who was the mother of the owner of Bradbury and Stam, was a member of the church. You can see how much being a part of this community really helped us get everything put together. And once we started, the entrance fee At the time we put out the bids, the apartment was going to be $370 a month for a one-bedroom, $450 for a two-bedroom, and $540 for a three-bedroom. But the bids rose from about $8 million to somewhere about $12 million. And that meant that the entrance fees went up to $7,500 and $10,000. And that was part because we were in a period of sometimes 13% inflation, and the cost of everything went up. We were in a meeting one time, and we were discussing some point, and someone said, while you people have been talking about this, our building has gone up $15,000. So let's get this going and let's get this underway. So as they started building this, they sent down a person named Reverend Robert Kohler. And he aggravated people. For one thing, everybody was on a first-name basis. We had had a wonderful relationship with the architects, with the builder, with the engineers. Everybody got along. We all worked constructively toward this. And when he came in, we asked him what he wanted to be called, and he said Reverend Kohler. And the architects I saw kind of froze a little bit. Pretty soon, H. Barker, who was the lead architect, would not come down to the site if Kohler was down there. And he had to send Andrew to handle all the problems. They had so many problems during the building. And I ran into H. Barker one day and he said, I really wish you were here. We never had any problems getting things done. And now we do. But they finished the building. I have always thought that the building was finished in August of 1980. And when people were moving in, I went down to see some of the people. While we were building this, I can't tell you how exciting it was to figure out how the rooms were going to be. Everybody who was on the committee had, if they weren't planning to move in as soon as it was built, they were planning to move in when they got older. And it was just thrilling to listen to this. Then when the building opened, I had this realization that I had little kids. I couldn't move in myself. I was going to have to wait a long time. And sure enough, I did. I moved in here pretty young, but it was quite a ways after it was built. And the reason I moved here is I had started working here as soon as the building was started, and I realized what a fun place it was. How much fun the people had, how happy they were, how much they liked the place. Now, when I talked to the first administrator here, his name was Larry LaFrenzen, and he and his wife, Kathy was like the minister's wife. She was the unpaid helper. She manned the front desk, she drove the van, took people places, and she designed the logo and generally helped out with whatever was needed. Well, they listened to what I was saying and what our philosophy was and why we did certain things, and he offered me a job. And so I don't know if you all can see this, it says Patricia D. Hill, and there's the logo of Good Samaritan, and it says Director of Community Services. There was a Director of Apartment Services, a Director of Nursing Services, and I was the Director of Community Services. And my job was to start the committees, start the practice of this facility governing itself as much as possible. We started the business of having a corridor rep, and then a floor rep, and then meetings of the executive committee, and then meetings of the whole committee. And we started taking minutes from the very beginning and having residents make resolutions, start committees. one of the things that happened here is there was quite a time when repairs were not being made to this building. When I came here in 2012, there was an estimate for a new roof. And I think like 8 or 10 years later, they still hadn't repaired the roof. And finally they did, because so many people were having, on the 6th floor, were having leaks in their apartment that damaged their furniture. The other thing was, there was an estimate to repave the parking lot. I think this is still hanging on. One of the things that happens over the years is some of the institutional memory gets lost. When we did the parking lot, they put in a special water permeable type of asphalt. That parking lot was required by the city water planning department to hold on to rainwater for a while before it released it into the city. When I was a kid and it rained, we lived right near Candelaria, and Candelaria would flood curb to curb, if any of you remember that. And then, of course, they built the diversion channel and they built all these other things. But water runoff was a big problem. And the other thing was, you'll notice that the parking lot is shaped with these hills and valleys. That's to contain the water and let it run off gradually. Well, due to the lack of institutional memory, they repaved it in regular asphalt that retained the water, and so it now takes a long time for the water to drain away. There were quite a few other things that the administration wasn't too happy about, that the residents really put through. One thing was, we wanted to have a committee that reviewed all the physical changes that needed to be done on the building. And after a couple of years, the residents here decided to put together that committee. And that is the Committee for Physical Improvements. And we worked on that, developing a list of all the physical improvements that residents suggested. And they were in 3 tiers. The first tier was less than $5,000, which could be approved on site. The second tier was $5,000 to $50,000, which could be approved by the regional manager. And finally, the 4th tier was anything over $50,000, which had to be approved in Sioux Falls. And it was the things that had to be approved by Sioux Falls that were not getting done. And it turned out that the administrator just wasn't pushing those projects. You really had to push a project to get the central to fund it. And it was a while before I found out why. A regional manager would have a budget of, let's say, $5 million for all the facilities in his region. And each facility wanted to make improvements. Now, they saved the money for the improvements in their capital fund. So we had millions of dollars in our capital fund. I think at one point it was something like, I better not say, but it was a big amount. But we could not spend that money until the regional manager could fit it into his budget. And I think that's part of the reason why the parking lot has been such a slow project. Now, when it was all open, we had an opening ceremony, and we had Sandra West, who was a city councilor for this district, come, and she gave a big speech. And then we had Orville Morin, who was on the Good Samaritan board. Now, one thing I should tell you about the Good Samaritan board is one of the people here, named Jack Reed, and another person named Dudley Wynn, both had mothers who were in Good Samaritan facilities. And they suggested that we might talk to Good Samaritan. And we did. We contacted Good Samaritan, we wrote them a letter, we made an appointment for us to fly out and do a presentation. We took our plans, we took our financing, we took everything to them, and they met and decided to take this project. And this was the very first apartment building that Good Samaritan had constructed. Everything else they had were nursing homes, which we now call care centers. But at that time, we really did call them nursing homes. So they agreed, and this was financed by, first, 20% of the cost of the building we had to raise here in Albuquerque. The second part was the remaining 80% was funded by municipal bonds. And I was a little surprised to find that when Good Samaritan sold this property, they had never put a nickel in, and they took quite a bit of money out of the property when they sold it. That was something that kind of grates. But that's business. And the people who are there now are very different from the people who were there when I was working on the project. And Good Samaritan had like 180 sites at the time. Before they sold a lot of them off, they had well more than that number. I think, in closing, I want to say, when you look around at Manzano del Sol today, you are seeing the result of this small committee of people who really decided to dream big and make this happen. And they did. And I'm very glad that I've been part of it. So my talk is finished. Now, I'm sure there are some people who would like to ask questions. If you would like to stay afterward, feel free to. I'll let the people who are going to go clear out now, and the people who want to ask questions can stay.
Let me get the microphone for you.
Doesn't anybody want to ask to go?
Yes, I do.
Yes?
I heard, I was a member of First Congregational Church a little bit later than that. I mean, I knew Reverend Rath, and I heard this story that they originally wanted to make the building specifically for teachers.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, not specifically for teachers, it was for low-income people.
Okay.
And what we were aiming at was a spinster school teacher. And that's what we called her, a spinster school teacher's retirement income.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
Patricia, what's the history of our beautiful grounds outside?
Oh, that has quite a history. I started a garden committee. Now, there are people, even within the Board of Care Associates, who wanted to take care of the residents. And I was out with Larry LaFrenzen, and we were looking at the area outside. The only thing was there was the pool. It did not have a cover, but the pool was there from the very beginning. And I said to Larry LaFrenzen, I'm starting a garden committee so that the residents can figure out what the garden should look like. And I said, we need to get that committee going because otherwise members of the Board of Care Associates or the people in administration here are going to go out and design the garden for the residents. And not 5 minutes later, one of the board members drove up with 6 rose bushes in his truck. And he said, I brought the start of the garden, I made plans for the garden, and Larry, the administrator, turned around to me and said, did you set this up? So we started with the garden committee, and piece by piece, they planned it out. Now, we did have gardeners for many years. We had Scott Ware as our gardener. He was wonderful. Catherine Higgins, when this first started, donated 250 rose bushes. That's why there's such a big rose garden, because we had 250 bushes to plant. And we wanted an English country garden, which is why there are big flower beds, and at different times we've had different species of plants in there, and sometimes more, like a sea of flowers during the summer. Things have changed every now and then. Every now and then they want to add something. We added the fish pond. We added the fountain in the rose garden. They also wanted to start a putting green. And there were some people who played golf here and really, really wanted a putting green. It just didn't go. Yes?
First of all, thank you for this history and for all you did to contribute to this place. I really appreciate it. I've heard you talk about the entry qualifications to live here. Could you go through those as well?
Yes. When we first started, you had to pass a financial test. Did you have enough money to live here? Secondly, you had to pass a physical test. We did not let people who were on canes or walkers move in. You had to be able to get around. We also had quite a bit younger bunch. Our age has gotten older over the years, our average. And then the third thing is you had to have a mental test to make sure that you were mentally capable of living independently. Now, after a few years, that didn't fly anymore. The other thing was very common here was smoking. And as the years went on, they said, well, we don't want to have smoking in the building. So they built a smoke shack outside. That little building outside that says Shalom, that was the smoke shack. Then after that, people complained because they had their windows open and they could smell all the smoke. So they moved the smoke shack over to where now the generator is. And people went out to there to smoke. And after that, they said, no more smoking anywhere on the grounds.
What about the exercise classes?
We did have someone who was the activities director who also did some exercises. It was not really a separate department. We also had a very much more art-centered activities. If you go up and down the halls, you'll see some of the ceramics that were done at that time. Yes?
Who planted the ponderosas? Can you tell us about that?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't remember those trees being specifically planted.
Interesting.
Yes?
I was of the opinion that this building started out as a 4-story and now it's 6-story. Is there any truth in that?
No. I have heard that this building started out as an 8-story building, and when they did the soil tests, when the engineers did the soil tests, they found that this ground would not support 8 stories. And they cut it down to 6 stories, and someone pointed out to me where there are some little odd things on the 6th floor that show that it was chopped off there. I don't remember that, and I think I would have remembered it if it had happened. But I just don't know quite how that went. That was after Reverend Kohler had taken over. Yes?
Some time ago, a former resident here, I can't remember her last name, but her first name was Mandy, I believe.
Mandy.
Yes. And she talked about it was either her husband or some relative that had been involved in, as an engineer or architect or contractor, that talked about just what you were saying about the land not supporting, being able to support the hire, and how they made some little shifts in construction. So I think that's probably what you're talking about as well.
I knew her because she was in the Department of Elderly Affairs or something like that. I did not know her husband. And he didn't interact with me at any point during this.
Okay.
Now, another thing that was, I'll tell you a funny story. I had a daughter who by this time was around 2.5. And we had various groups who came to us and complained about our handicap facilities and what handicap changes we were making. And there was a woman who lived out at the Holiday Inn and she was a dwarf, or a little person, and her husband had something else, and he was in a wheelchair. And they lived in a motel, and they had people come to help them get ready and not get ready. So she was very angry and really kind of abusive when she talked to me on the phone. So I went out to do PR, calm her down, find out what it was that she really wanted, and make a list of the handicapped issues that there were with the building. So when I went out, I had to take my daughter, Megan. And when we got there, Megan looked at this lady and said, "Oh," and ran up and gave her a hug and kissed her on the cheek. All the disgruntlement was gone. And she had little kid furniture, little child chairs, and Megan just sat down at the little child chairs, and it was a wonderful visit. They became big supporters of our plan. Yes?
Could you tell us how the food service developed? Is it different as it was originally?
Yes, it was very different. When we first got here, I can't remember his name. We had a cook who had been a Navy cook. And there was not this office here outside in the dining room. There was an office inside the kitchen. And it wasn't really an office, it was sort of like an enclosure where he had his desk and no computer. And I went in and talked to him about starting the food committee. And he said, "Well, if you have a bunch of old people, all they're going to do is complain about the food. And there's no point in setting up a committee because I can tell you what they're going to complain about." Well, I said, it's better to start the committee and give the people here a voice in what they eat. So, under duress, he would come to our committee meetings. And one day he said to me, "You know, the only thing that matters is if I stay in my budget. It doesn't matter what I cook. If I go under my budget, I'm out of a job." But actually, his food was pretty good. He was very experienced. Now, he did some things that people really objected to. At Thanksgiving, he would get the turkey loaf and slice it. And the residents wanted whole turkeys, sliced up. And one lady said, "I don't want turkey meat that's glued together." So now, years go by, and I moved in here in 2012. Completely different people here, completely different food service. And I went to the food committee just to see how it was. And the meeting was exactly the same. You could have videotaped the meeting from the 80s and put it today, and it's the same stuff. Vegetables overcooked.
Is Catherine Higgins the same lady from Chaparral Electric?
I don't think so. She's asking if Catherine Higgins is the same lady from Chaparral Electric. Her husband was a car salesman at Dallas Chevrolet.
Okay. Because I thought that lady might be a little younger, but still the things you said about her describes the other lady too.
Yes.
Okay.
Talking about what year was the first resident moved in here when y'all opened?
It was December of 1980.
80. And Mandy Pino's husband was the architect that they hired? Because Mandy told that story to everyone.
Well, he may well have worked for the city, and the city had to approve the plans, but he was not an architect on the project, at least as far as I ever heard.
No, they had to hire an architect to redo the plans and bring it down to 6 floors.
I don't know anything about
And
that.
they said, Mandy, at a party, they were going out the front door, and Mandy's mother said, "You don't think I'm moving in here with all these old people?" Yes, he moved in 6 months later, Mandy's mother.
Oh, there's some other things that people said. There was never planned to be a freight elevator in the back. That's why we have a big elevator with the curtains. That's our freight elevator to move people up and down. Yes.
You did the most wonderful thing for several years. You had a group of people who were on welcome, that you called welcome committee, the welcome dinner.
Yes.
And it was a means of having new people get to know one another.
Yes.
And you did that so long that there really was a wonderful atmosphere that was developed through that, because we met people on every floor. Once you'd been on, you got bumped off when new people came on. And it was just splendid to do.
This was when I moved in, there was very little that was done to welcome people into the community. And so we suggested that we have a residence dinner every other Thursday in the hobby room. And we would invite the 12 most recent move-ins. And I explained it's like a bus. You come here, the new people get in the bus and go down and sit down. The old people have to give up their seat because they already know everybody here. And it was terrific. They welcomed people. People got to know a little core group, and many of the people that other people met during these dinners became good friends. But when COVID came, we had to stop. And it was never picked up again. Yes?
I was wondering, one of the main things I love here, is that they will take me to doctor's appointments and all. Have they always done that?
Yes. Jack Reed, who was one of the members of the board, said, "My mother has plenty of money. She lives in a nursing home, and when she wants to go somewhere, she won't go because she has to hire a cab. And they have no other transportation." And he said, "We need to have transportation for the people that's included in their rent, so that people will go and they will think that the transportation is free. They're actually paying for it, but they're not paying for it specifically out of their own pocket." The other thing that we insisted on that was not common here was having a nurse on staff. And that was considered a real extravagance. But Ed Luther recommended it. He said a nurse will pay back because a nurse will catch things early on.
Well, there's no more questions. I think she deserves a really big round.